Well, hello and welcome to this particular seminar on wonder and curiosity. I'm Christopher Perrin. I have been going through the 8 essential principles of classical pedagogy and been offering a webinar on each one of these principles. And now I think we are at the principle that is number 6 in my sequence. It's not a list that has fallen down from heaven, but I think these 8 principles are helpful, one helpful way of summarizing the pedagogical principles that come down to us in the classical tradition of education. And I think that if we focus on principles well, we will learn how to apply them well in practices. Um, I think that there is a dynamic relationship between principles and practices, and really they come together. And so as soon as you start talking about principles, you're really already beginning to address practices, because the principles don't really make sense until you can imagine them in practice, being expressed by a teacher with students. And as you're talking about practices, there's you can't help but to be thinking, well, what's informing these practices? So it's a kind of dance that we do with principles and practices. So I hope that by talking about the tradition of wonder and curiosity in a principial fashion, we can transition quickly to how these actually can be embodied in the ways in which we concretely teach students and children. So the topic is wonder and curiosity. Wonder is an important aspect of the classical tradition of education. It's really at the root and the beginning of the entire enterprise. You think about it, aren't children born with an inherent sense of wonder and awe at the world, at the cosmos? Chesterton says that when we are born as it were into a fairy tale, and that we confront our parents like brigands from behind a bush. And he says every face you see on the street is a face from a fairy tale. It's a fairy tale that happens to be true. You exist. You're here. You didn't plan it. You didn't decide it. Someone else authored you and wrote you into this story, and here you are. Chesterton also says that if we could just realize this, we would, with a start, wake up and realize that we exist. The wonder at even existing. Children come with this, and it stays with them for several years, and it's easy to cultivate. That children are so naturally have it, and they can grow it. But in our American educational system, it seems that we drain or beat it out of our children by the time they're about 12 or 13. Isn't that the case? Isn't it the case that some of you adults listening to this seminar realize that your childlike wonder at the world and at being in the world has diminished and perhaps all but disappeared because of the anxious total world of work that we find ourselves immersed in? So part of recovering wonder is to recover our own childlike awe at existing and being in this wonderful cosmos. So you can see how that's a kind of root issue that in a significant way determines everything that's going to come in the future. Let me show you an image as we get going. Children are so easily drawn to examining things that they find in this world. If you're out on a playground with a group of children and you say, look, come over here, I think I found a worm, or an ant, or look at this beetle, or is that a snake? You will have the crowd of children gathering around to examine and look, just like you see these girls in the stream, looking, examining, at delight in this world. I see the water running by in the stream, and I'm reminded of another Chesterton quotation. Forgive me for always referring to Chesterton. I did do my dissertation on G.K. Chesterton, and since then everything is G.K. Chesterton. But Chesterton said that in the fairy tales we make the waters run with wine to remind us for one wild instant that they run with water. Because water is miraculous. Water is like wine. You can drink it. You can splash in it. You can bathe in it. You can clean with it. You can cook with it. You can boil it. Water is amazing, and children naturally and inherently know this. We have to forget that water is as magical as wine. So this is actually a part of the tradition. It goes all the way back to Plato, who said that the education of children is an education in wonder and delight. He called it musicae. It's musical education. And we'll be talking about that shortly. But first, let's talk about children for just a bit longer. Chesterton says, you knew that was coming, didn't you? Chesterton says that the 7-year-old is quite excited about the prospect that there might be a dragon behind the door, and that the 3-year-old is excited by the prospect of the door. You know how 2 and 3-year-olds will just play with things, up and down, put it in, take it out, open the door, close the door, open the door, close the door. Isn't that magical? Because the 2 and 3-year-old is that delight in the world. Think about the children in your life, their squeals of delight, their love for natural things. So we want to return to that. We want to recuperate it and reappropriate it. Before we begin in earnest, let me draw your attention to some resources that have been very helpful to me. What I have learned about wonder in this tradition comes largely from the books that I'm going to share with you now. One is this book, which is a book that's coming out in December of 2013. It's called The Liberal Arts Tradition, Philosophy of Christian Classical Education, published by Classical Academic Press. Kevin Clark and Ravi Scott Jain are veteran educators of about 10 years at the Geneva School in Orlando, and they're teacher scholars. They have done a lot of thinking about what classical education used to be and what it can be and should be now as we recover it and renew it. And I think this new book has done a terrific job at giving us a new view, a new way of looking at the classical tradition and talking about it. In fact, to summarize their essential insights, this chart does it for us. It's the PGMapped Paradigm. We're used to thinking of classical education as grammar, logic, and rhetoric. These 3 arts being recovered, and these 3 arts also being recovered as stages of learning. Well, that's helpful, but it doesn't really fully comprehend the tradition, because the classical tradition of education was far more than just grammar, logic, and rhetoric. Now, those arts are critical, and we need to recover them. I spent about the first 5 years of my career in classical education working on the recovery of those 3 arts. But of course, there's the quadrivium arts as well that follow. Grammar, logic, and rhetoric are verbal arts, mastery of the tongue, mastery of language. But then there's geometry, there's astronomy, there's music, there's arithmetic. These mathematical arts also need to be recovered, and typically these quadrivium arts are done, at least particularly music as an acoustical study is mathematical. Astronomy is related to physics. Geometry, of course, you've probably had some geometry. These are understood to be taught largely in the upper school. So we think of the trivium and the quadrivium in a kind of progression from lower school to upper school. But of course, mathematics is, we teach arithmetic quite young. But anyway, beyond just thinking of classical education as grammar, logic, and rhetoric, and then geometry and astronomy and arithmetic and music, we also can think of piety, gymnastic, and music. If you look at that column here, and let me just see if I can pull up a tool here and illustrate this a bit for you. So see this column here. These 6 elements: piety, gymnastic, music, the liberal arts, which involve the trivium and the quadrivium, and then philosophy and theology, describe the kind of trajectory that we want to see students move through in the classical tradition of education. And so we have this little, viator, this traveler, the student moving over time through piety, gymnastic, music, the liberal arts, eventually into the study of philosophy and theology. And these things, of course, will continue throughout life, no doubt. But theology, philosophy and theology were seen as kind of the capstone of study in the classical tradition, with the piety, gymnastic, musical education, liberal arts leading to that and being preparatory for that. Well, right here in, piety is learning to love and fear God and honoring your parents and elders. It's the fifth commandment. Honor your mother and father. Love your mother and father. Even your mothers and fathers who have come before you, even centuries before you. Augustine and Aquinas are your fathers. And then gymnastic is that realization that we are enfleshed souls. We are composite beings, a union of souls and bodies. And so the body, gymnastic, of course, making reference to the body, is very important in the overall educational endeavor, because that body contains a soul, and a soul contains a body. So what we are actually doing with our bodies is not neglecting the soul. It's actually another way of dealing with the soul. Think about what happens when students play together and participate together in sports and athletics and other events outside. Their souls are being cultivated in those activities. That's why recess is still recognized as critically important to lower school education in particular. When the children come back from recess, they seem to do mathematics with a fresh curiosity and interest. Much to say there, but we'll leave it for now, because I really wanted to focus on here this aspect of musical education in wonder, through experiencing nature and participating in the songs, stories, and art of human culture. That's musical education. I'll have more to say about that when we consider Plato, but consider this paradigm as one that will help us to look at the whole. Lastly, before I leave this chart, notice this progression from wonder to worship to work and to wisdom. Because classical education has as its goal wisdom. In fact, we might say wisdom, grace, and virtue here. Sometimes eloquence is included as one of the traditional goals for a liberal arts education. And then note that it's founded in wonder, anchored in wonder, that leads to wisdom. I think that's pretty cool. Well, let's go back. We have these children. We want to recover this. We have some additional resources, and let me just show you a few of those. Here are some of the books that have really helped me. C.S. Lewis's book, The Abolition of Man. Now, just circle that for you. This book by C.S. Lewis is a short little book, but full of profound wisdom. It took me 3 or 4 times reading it, so I think it's only 120 pages or so. But the first half of the book is well worth meditating on and really understanding. Then, of course, there's Plato, the Republic, particularly books 2, 3, and 7 of the Republic deal with education. And then this book here by Josef Pieper, Leisure, the Basis of Culture, is really helpful in understanding this idea of what it means to be at rest, have restful education. Restful education is guided by being at wonder in the world. And A.G. Sertalange also deals with this. By the way, Josef Pieper is German, Sertalange is French, and Sertalange deals with what it means to be a student, the virtues necessary to be a student. And we'll look at a quotation from him briefly. All of these books really helpful in recovering wonder as that root theme that guides education. Okay. So here they are listed for you, but let's move on a little bit, and let's go to just a few more comments about children, and then off we go to some positive content. I've been mentioning the children who are excited about the dragon behind the door, and the younger children who are excited just by the door. Um, Children will gather together and study, young children, just about anything you present to them with enthusiasm. They will trust you and they will follow the leader. So if you were to stand up and say, children, today we are going to study Sanskrit, or we're going to study archaeology, they will probably stand up and say, that's great, yay, and then ask you, well, what is archaeology? What is Sanskrit? Because they are ready to study. They are students, and at the root of that word student is this idea of zeal and eagerness and affection and fondness. Studium means that. It means affection, fondness, enthusiasm, and zeal in Latin. And the word student is derived from studium. So we have to kill this natural wonder, and that's something that we don't want to do. Now, if we just pause there for a moment, those of you who are teachers in schools or homeschools, can you already see practices? Are practices already starting to bubble up? If this is true, what might you do different in your classroom? What might you do differently in your homeschool if wonder is something that needs to be cultivated and grown? What things might you need to stop doing? Are you doing too much? Think about the students in some of our American schools who by junior high and even sometimes in upper elementary school are tracking with, say, 8 subjects a day at 43 minutes a period, plus extracurriculars, sporting events, plus doing piano or violin, being carted off to lessons after school and so forth. Tracking all of these 8 subjects, say, for which they are being numerically graded on a weekly basis with data-driven, machine-readable tests. Oh, and by the way, carrying 20-pound backpacks over one shoulder, driving our chiropractors crazy. Is it any wonder that these students, by the time they're 12 or 13, are no longer like those 2 girls bent over in the stream? Is it no wonder that they have lost their joy in study and exploration? So there's something perhaps about our system as it's evolved that works against this classical principle of education. Well, let's go on. Joseph Pieper, I mentioned his book, Leisure, the Basis of Culture, profoundly recovers the idea of wonder at the root of education. So well does he do this that I think I can do a lot worse than to give you some of these quotations and just to quote him verbatim. So look at some of these quotations from his book, Leisure, the Basis of Culture, with me. Philosophy has its beginning in the experience of wonder. Philosophy is that discipline that looks at the overall connection of things, the overall meanings of things, what really is metaphysics, what is the good life, ethics, and what can be known, epistemology, and these kinds of large questions about life's meaning and purpose are addressed by philosophy. And of course, philosophy means the love of wisdom, because these kind of questions, it was understood, led to becoming a wise person. And even if you didn't ever acquire wisdom, because it was kind of the height of hubris to say you had actually arrived and acquired wisdom, it was still appropriate to say that you loved wisdom, even if you didn't think you attained it. And Pieper says that it's that disciplined philosophy that begins in the experience of wonder. He says as well, the commonplace mind, rendered deaf-mute, finds everything self-explanatory. And he's here interacting with his view that we get immersed in the total world of work. He uses that phrase, the total world of work, which lifts us away from even having the time and the frame of mind to see what is to be seen, to see things that are delightful and wonderful. He says that kind of commonplace mind, rendered deaf-mute, finds everything self-explanatory. But what really is self-explanatory? Is it self-explanatory then that we exist, he asks? Is it self-explanatory that there is such a thing as seeing? One of the great philosophic questions is, why is there something rather than nothing? Is it self-explanatory that we are here and that this world is here? The commonplace mind, immersed in the total world of work, can no longer ask that question. He says as well, the one who experiences wonder is the one who, astounded by the deeper aspects of the world, cannot hear the immediate demands of life. In other words, the total world of work starts to fade away for a while, if even for a moment. That moment when he gazes on the astounding vision of the world. And he says theoria, which is this Greek idea of contemplation, the good life of seeking truth, goodness, and beauty. He says theoria can only exist to the extent that man has not become blind to the wondrous, the wonderful fact that something exists. He says the ability to experience wonder is one of the highest possibilities of human nature. So he's valuing it pretty high. He says now I'm going to go to that red book for just a moment, written by Sertalange, The Intellectual Life. He says something very similar and very memorable. He says this: every intellectual work begins by a moment of ecstasy. Ecstasy. When I first read this, I threw the book down. What is he talking about? Every intellectual work, and by intellectual work he means the work of being a student, it begins by a moment of ecstasy. Only in the second place does the talent of arrangement, the technique of transitions, connection of ideas, construction come into play. All that other kind of student work. He says that comes into play secondarily, but it must begin by a moment of ecstasy. Now, what is this ecstasy? Continuing on with this quotation. Now, what is this ecstasy but a flight upwards, away from self, a forgetting to live our own poor life in order that the object of our delight may live in our thought and in our heart. You see, that word ecstasy literally means to be taken out of. That word ek means out of in Greek, and stasis means stationary and placed. So to be lifted out of your foothold, if you will, lifted out of the place where you are standing or stuck, is to be ecstatic. And he says that's what happens when we are caught up with the ideal of something that is, say, true, good, and beautiful in this world. We forget our poor selves for a moment, and as it were, we fly upwards as we gaze. And we say to ourselves, I would have that. He says, that is the beginning of the life of study. If we don't have that, we don't have a student. Can you see the practices coming into play here? This means that we need to cultivate this in especially younger students such that they will actually be students. Because if you have a student who is at wonder in the world, guess what he'll be doing when you're not around? Even when you're not around, he or she will continue to be exploring, seeking, and finding, because there's this internal bubbling up motivation that's come from various moments of ecstasy. I think that's beautiful. And it has implications for the classroom. It means that teachers cannot really go forward in a discipline by using behavioral methods of control. Rewards and punishments may get a student to do certain kinds of tasks and move through certain steps, but you may not actually have a student. You have resistant material. You have a student who will go through the period, who will cram, succeed on the test, and then forget. Fall into that cram, test, forget cycle, which many of us have gone through in our own high school and college educations. How many of us have taken courses? We can hardly remember the name of the course, let alone what was taught in the course, because we put everything in our short-term memory, figured out how to game the professor or the teacher, get the grade, forget it, and move on. And then maybe we got A's and B's, but we really didn't learn anything, and we certainly didn't continue to study those arts because we weren't at wonder. So this means that teachers need to know have to be cultivators of affections. We'll be talking about that next when we look at Lewis. But to continue, just for two more quotations with Pieper, he says that both the poet and the philosopher are concerned with wonder. Both the poet and the philosopher. philosophy looking high and abstractly about how all things connect, and poetry looking concretely at experience and putting the best words in the best order and saying things that cannot be said in other ways via poetry and metaphor and symbol and imagery. Both of these disciplines, one very concrete and grounded, another very abstract, sometimes philosophical, are concerned with and begin with wonder. And then lastly, he says, it's not the last thing he says in the book, but lastly on my list, Pieper says, the wonderful is not to be found in the world of work. And he's not deprecating work, because he thinks that work can be infused with wonder, but often the total world of work, to use this phrase again, squeezes out the possibility of wonder for us. And when our schools and homeschools become like the total world of work, we are squeezing out wonder, and we are short-circuiting the ability for our students to actually be students. I think that's the implication of this principle from the classical tradition. Well, let's take a look at what, sorry about that. Let's take a look at what Lewis says. And I just need to switch here. Lewis as well has much to say about this topic. I'm still having a little trouble here. There we go. In his little book, The Abolition of Man. And I always grab that again. Good. This little book is really a recovery of some insights from Aristotle and Augustine. This idea that there are lovely things that really exist in the world, and we are to love them. And we are to have ordered loves for them. Augustine used the phrase, the ordo amoris, the order of love. And that what he meant by that is not so much a sequence as an appropriate, warranted response to the object that we are beholding. And Lewis begins with an anecdote from an anecdote featuring Samuel Coleridge, who was visiting some beautiful waterfalls, I believe, in Scotland, and he overheard two tourists talking about this waterfall. And one of the tourists said that the waterfall was sublime, and the other said that it was pretty. And Lewis is quoting a couple of English authors who then subject this little anecdote to a critique, and they say, really, the tourist who said the waterfall is sublime is not saying anything really about the waterfall. It's inherently, by its nature, is not sublime. But they are saying something, this tourist rather, was saying something about his or her feelings. He had sublime feelings while looking at the waterfall. And you see how, therefore, our subjective response and observation of, say, a waterfall is separated into my own feelings, which do not necessarily connect to anything inherently valuable and beautiful about the waterfall. Lewis said that makes a huge difference, and in fact, it actually separates the old way from the new modernistic way. And of course, Lewis is saying we need to go back to this older way of recognizing that in the cosmos, there is inherent harmony and beauty, and there are inherently beautiful, he called it objective value, that objects in this beautiful world have objective value, and we are to call the beautiful things beautiful and the ugly things ugly. And the beautiful things really are beautiful, and we need to conform our souls to be in harmony with the harmony that really exists in the world. He says that education is not a matter of cutting back jungles, meaning students who are excessively, say, affective or emotional, but it's a matter of irrigating deserts, that most students, he says, 3 out of 4, are somber and dry and cold and vulgar, and they need to be irrigated like deserts. In other words, their affections need to be cultivated to love the things that are lovely. He says, he's quoting Aristotle here, that the aim of education is to make the pupil like and dislike what he ought. Any implications of this in your classrooms? How do you help a student to like what he should like and to dislike what he should not. This is a root issue. Keep thinking about that as we look at some of these other quotations. He says, the little human animal will not at first have the right responses, say to a waterfall. It must be trained to feel pleasure, liking, disgust, and hatred at those things which really are pleasant, likable, disgusting, and hateful. In other words, our affections need to be cultivated. This kind of goes against the current of modern thinking, doesn't it? Boy. Because it assumes that there really are inherent attributes, inherent values in things. The third quotation, it is not excess of thought, but defect of fertile and generous emotion that marks them out. And the them that he's talking about are these critics who are saying that there is this division between our feelings and the inherent reality of things. He says, their heads are no bigger than ordinary. It is the atrophy of the chest beneath that makes them seem so, makes their heads seem bigger. In other words, these people aren't more heady. They're not smarter than the average person. These people who are saying, when you say a waterfall is sublime, you're just describing your own feelings. He says, no, their heads are like anybody else. But what's different about them is that their chests are shrunken. They no longer have the right affections, the right loves for the things that are lovely, and even the right disgust for the things that are disgusting. They lack properly trained taste and sentiment. He says, in a sort of ghastly simplicity, speaking of what we're doing to students when we adopt their view, the men without chests, we remove the organ and we demand the function. We make men without chests and expect of them virtue and enterprise. We laugh at honor and are shocked to find traitors in our midst. We castrate and bid the geldings be fruitful. There's much more that he says along these lines in his little book, The Evolution of Man, and I recommend it to you, but I think you get the gist of this. So it's worth pausing just a moment again and asking ourselves, if this is a principle of education, that wonder naturally exists but must be cultivated, what should we be doing? How should we be teaching? What should be different about me as a teacher? How should I think differently, perhaps, about the students in my midst? Of course, we're going to talk about that explicitly, but I just want to keep your brain engaged on that particular question. What practices evolve from this principle? Well, let's move on, and let's talk about Plato for a little bit. Let's make sure that I can do this. There we go. Plato in education. Plato was perhaps the first person, well, in fact, I think he was the first person. I don't know of anyone who came prior to him that we have in writing. He may have been interacting with other Greeks who'd come before him, talking about a tradition of education that existed even before Plato. But Plato, in his book, The Republic, talks explicitly about education, the education of children. He does so in some other places too, like in the Laws and other places. But in this particular book, which is a dialogue featuring Socrates, and Plato is speaking through Socrates. Socrates represents Plato's thinking. Plato was taught by Socrates. We find Socrates talking with a number of characters in this long dialogue about a number of things. Politics, of course, the ideal polis or city, the city-state. But education, of course, if we're going to craft the ideal political environment, the ideal city-state, we need to know how to educate our children, don't we? So that comes up often in the Republic. And here's one very, I think, helpful quotation that summarizes a lot of what he says in the Republic. And I'm just going to read it here for you. He says, this is Socrates speaking, "What kind of education shall we give them? We shall find it difficult to improve on the time-honored distinction between the physical training that we give to the body and the education we give to the mind and character." Now, what's interesting about this quotation is the Greek words, actually. the Greek word that's used here for education is really not, it's not adequately translated in English. It can't be, because it has a semantic range that just can't be captured by one English word. So, by the way, this is one reason we need to study foreign languages, is because some things, in fact, are lost in translation. Thankfully, in a lot of good books, translations of the Republic, for example, there will be a footnote explaining what this word means, explaining what's behind the English word education here, and it's the Greek word musike. And musike is the root for our word music. It's the root for our word museum. It's the root for our word amusement. We'll see this a little bit later. And it's related to the word muse, the Greek muses. And education, as Plato's using the word here, musike, was a collection of studies regarding the collection of arts that were inspired by the 9 muses. There were 9 muses, and here they are for you right here. You can see their names. Their names have something to do with what they represent. For example, polyhymnia has to do with hymns or singing. But we have epic poetry, history, lyric poetry, song and elegiac poetry, tragedy, hymns, elegiac, dance, comedy, astronomy. This together consists of what we might call musical education. But it's not musical education as we typically think of it when we hear this in English. It's not learning to play, say, the violin or the piano, or say learning how to sight read, learning music theory. That we might call, it is certainly music, but let's call that acoustics for now. That was a study in the quadrivium, the study of music as a mathematical art, studying all of the ratios and harmonies, which were ratios that exist in music as a mathematical art. And you probably have heard, if you don't know this already, that music and mathematics are very much related. In fact, music can be considered as a form of mathematics if you look at it as a series of ratios. Well, Plato called this musical education in a different sense. It was these arts inspired by the muses. Now, just to go back to this chart for a moment, remember, it was education in wonder. Sometimes I mean to underline something and I kind of cross it out. Sorry about that. So music here is different than music here. That's the distinction. You might call this music number 1 and this music number 2. This musical education involved experiencing wonder in the world, not just in nature, but also in the songs, the stories, and the art of your people and your culture. So this is where literature and history and poetry come in, are properly situated in a classical education. You think about it, if you've been doing classical education and you've been doing grammar, logic, and rhetoric, and mathematics and geometry, well, that's really great. But how does literature and history fit into your curriculum? What was its place in the classical tradition? Because literature is not a liberal art. History is not a liberal art. Let's speak this chart and this recovery really by Clark and Jane help us to see its place. Literature and song and dance and history were playgrounds for the liberal arts and preparatory for them as well. So it was during this time of musical education that students' tastes were cultivated. As Clark and Jane say in their book, Plato and Aristotle and these Greeks sought to train the body and tune the hearts. That's just worth writing down. I should have put that. I should have recorded it earlier. Train the body. And tune the heart. That's what happens here in gymnastic and music. Now let me go back to my outline for a moment. So this is musical education. It's during these younger years, early elementary and even going into upper elementary education, where we learn, we sing songs, we do chants, we observe the beautiful art, beautiful paintings, beautiful sculpture, beautiful architecture that's been handed down to us. We are at wonder at these things, and we love these things, and we love this tradition as we immerse ourselves in it using these arts. We love before we critique. Isn't that great? Now you know why you do literature in second grade, and third grade, and fourth grade, why you read with and aloud and to your students. Now you know why you sing these lovely folk songs and listen to beautiful music and hang up beautiful art all around your classroom and home. It's because you are honoring your parents and you are engaging in a delightful interaction with the tradition that's come down to you and the world in which you have found yourself. That's musical education. And Plato says it's this musicae which we give to the psyche. Psyche is the Greek word that means life and mind and heart, and it involves the whole person and character. So it's translated by this particular translator as mind and character, but it's one word, psyche. So musicae is for the psyche. By the way, we get the word psychology from psyche, the study of the mind. Isn't that excellent? So again, are there some practices beginning to bubble up in your mind as you think about this tradition of musicae or musical tradition? And does engagement with this musical education stop in the lower school? Stop by sixth grade? No, it certainly is very formative. It's forming and shaping souls in these early years, such that a love for the things that are lovely would continue throughout the rest of one's life. But it doesn't stop. Musical education does not stop at sixth grade. We continue to study, say, literature and history, and we continue to, say, do chorus and singing and art all the way through a classical curriculum. Okay, well, let's move on to the next section of this seminar, which is just to do a little etymology before we'll conclude with some time focusing on practical applications. So, make sure I've got this set right. It's not always wise to look at the etymology of words as a way of studying important and significant meaning. But in this case, I think looking at the Greek and Latin roots of some of these words like musicae, we've done that already, is actually illuminating and helpful, particularly since our current vocabulary for education, for things, for educational terminology, our educational terminology is abstract or it's ambiguous, and there's a wide range of meaning for a word like education or learning or school. And so therefore I find it helpful to recover some of these old words. They have bite and meaning that can shed light on what we're doing. So the Greek word paideia, which is their big word for education, I find really helpful. It means childing. It means taking a pais, which is the Greek word for child, and making him into a fully functioning anthropos, a fully functioning citizen in the Greek society. We want to, and it's 360 degrees. It involves parents, it involves schooling, it involves the community, and we, as Christians, we say it involves the church. All of these things together. It does take a village. It wasn't Hillary Clinton who thought that. It goes all the way back to the Greeks. They realized it took the entire polis to properly shape and raise up a child into a citizen. So I love recovering these words. We need these words. And such is the case with some other words. So let's take a look at some. Wonder. Where do we get the word wonder? Well, in Latin, the word is admiratio. And admiratio comes from admirare, which means to look at. This word mirare means to look. And to ad means to or towards. So admiratio means to look towards something with a steady gaze, as it were. Of course, we get our English word admiration from this. The things that you admire are things that compel your gaze. Think about Psalm 27. David writes, "One thing I seek of the Lord, to dwell in the temple of the Lord, and to gaze upon his beauty. So in the Christian Hebrew tradition here, we have this idea of wanting to be looking at the beautiful face of God if it were possible. We find in Luke 10 this story about Martha and Mary. Martha working busily in the kitchen, and Mary sitting with Jesus Christ and enjoying conversation with him after dinner. Martha gets annoyed and says, Jesus, please tell my sister Mary to help me in the kitchen. And Jesus says, Martha, Martha, you're busy about many things, but Mary has chosen what is best. Aren't we like Martha? Busy about many things, even in education, covering material, preparing for tests, giving tests, recording the grades of tests, turning the tests back, dealing with the challenges and the pride and the envy and the despair that come with that, and doing the cycle again. But perhaps lacking this time to gaze on the things that are beautiful and helping our students to do the same. Miratio is a similar word. It just doesn't have the odd there. It means to look at. We get the word mirror from mirare, miratio. You look at yourself in a mirror. Miraculum is something to see. It's a sight to be seen. A miracle was something that was a sight to be seen. It was unusual, and you would usually call people's attention to it. Mirandus, miranda means wondrous. Again, something to see. So the metaphor of seeing and gazing and looking is at the root of wonder. Do you take time to see, to truly see things? Are your eyes trained to see? Do you give yourselves time to notice and observe? And how about your mind's eye? Because figuratively speaking, it doesn't just mean what you see with your eyeballs, but seeing with your whole soul. The Greek word for wonder is thaumazo, and the adjective thaumastos. Thaumastos is a word with a wide range. Look at it. Wonderful, marvelous, worthy of pious admiration, admirable, excellent, passing human comprehension, causing amazement, joined with terror, marvelous, extraordinary, striking, surprising. Wonder. And then the Greek word for education we've really already talked about. I will only speak briefly about amusia and museum. Amusia means to be without musicae. It means to be without the inspiration of the muses. And we get our English word amusement from this. To be in a state of amusio is to be idle, bored, and without inspiration. A museum, classically considered, was the place where you went to study the arts inspired by the muses. So the museum in Alexandria was going way back, was really a study center and a library where scholars gathered to study the arts. So what if we could regard the cosmos, the nature, as a living museum? What if our schools, what if we traveled with that metaphor a little bit? What if our schools were to be something like living museums, or to be museums, places where the inspiration of these arts, history, literature, song, dance, visual arts, sculpture, lived and breathed? Worth thinking about. And then the Latin translation, the Romans brought musicae, the Greek word musicae, right into Latin, and musica can mean music and culture. It doesn't have quite the rich range that it has in Greek, but it still was an important enough word that they brought it right into Latin. And then we have just a couple more and we're done. We have the Latin word for curiosity. This is, I think, very interesting. We have studium, which means zeal, eagerness, enthusiasm, application, and so forth. It means fondness and affection. Studiosus, the adjective, means eager, zealous, diligent, anxious, striving. And the verb studio means to be eager for, to be earnest, to take pains, strive after, and be busy with. We touched on this already, but you see, you really don't have a student unless you have studium. A studium, classically considered, should be filled with zeal an eagerness, an enthusiasm, and fondness for, and an affection for truth, goodness, and beauty. That should be the inclination of his soul. That needs to be cultivated. It's there in seed form, but it needs to be watered and grown. And then miraculum is another word. We've already seen it, but it can also mean curiosity, something that's a curiosity. Or if you have curiosity, you're engaged in something to be seen. And then this word, kuriosis, as well, means careful, thoughtful, inquiring, and inquisitive. Well, let's finish up. Let's finish up by talking about the implications of this in a little more detail. How is it that perhaps grammar school teachers can be the leaders of the entire school if this is true? If wonder is at the root of education, if we move from wonder to wisdom, and wonder is so important to cultivate, then doesn't it follow that our lower school teachers, the teachers of the young, in one important sense, are leading the entire endeavor, the entire school? Because wonder is not something that should be lost. It's something that should be so deeply cultivated in a student that it will continue and endure throughout those junior high years that usually kill it. Think about what we face that kills wonder in our culture. Think about, therefore, the challenge of lower school teachers. What's militated against us? Well, there's iTunes and all of the music that can come flooding in, good and, of course, lots of bad, too. iTunes, Facebook, the internet generally, Hollywood, sitcom, the mall, our obsession with athletics and athleticism, all of these things. The billboards that you pass when you drive and that are now turning digital and flashing before your very eyes like the internet. All of these things have soul-shaping powers. And and they tend to quench our delight at the world and distract us and diffuse us, complicate things, making it hard for us to have restful learning, to even have time and space in our souls to be at wonder at anything. What TV does to us is and the internet is reduce our attention span to about 35 seconds. So we're up against a challenge, and it's teachers who lead children to love the lovely and to be at wonder in the world, who help kids to acquire a big enough chest to stand up and overcome all of those challenges that I just mentioned. So in this sense, lower school teachers are the preeminent teachers in a classical school. Homeschooling moms and dads who cultivate the love of wonder in their young children are doing perhaps some of the most important work in the classical conception of education. So we tend to think of those upper school teachers with their smarts and specialization and advanced degrees leading Socratic discussions as being the leaders of a classical school. Well, in one sense, perhaps they are. It's a capstone of the education when the kids are finishing up in high school. And it is impressive and exciting, but the first grade teacher who is imprinting such a white-hot love for the things that are beautiful and wonder at them, perhaps is just as important, maybe more important. And this is why I think that older kids need to visit the younger kids, and older kids need to be involved in the teaching of younger students. Older kids can come into the younger classes and teach and inspire, and the younger children will love it. However, what's happening when, say, the 10th graders are coming into the 4th grade class is not just that the 4th graders are being blessed, but those 10th graders are also being challenged once again to remember where they've come, to stay in that same stream of wonder which they have been traveling and swimming. So I know of a school, for example, where they sing the doxology every day at the close of the day, and the high school students, some of them were beginning to basically think of this as a kind of a dry routine, and were singing the doxology with distracted faces, looking at their shoes and their watches. And so what did the school decide to do? bring the first graders into their midst one afternoon and have the first graders sing along with them, who of course sang at the top of their lungs with broad smiles, looking at each other and everyone around them. And it injected some liveliness and into these older students, and reminded these older students who they really are and who they needed to remember to be. So that's this point. How about you in your school? Are there ways in which the lower school teachers and the lower school students can actually lead the entire institution? And then how do we do this? Well, we have to lead by loving and learning, don't we? Isn't this the case that if we personally aren't at wonder, can we expect our students to be? So we need to model our own wonder and delight and affection and body in various ways. I know of a teacher who was quite a guitarist, and so his guitar was always, he was an upper school teacher, his guitar was always out on a stand. And at any time, he might pull out that guitar and he might play something. He might play in between classes. He might play during a class. That instrument was symbolically representative of his own love of things that are beautiful, as well as a real means by which he helped shape the souls of his students. He ended up inspiring multiple students in this school to take up the guitar or music themselves. I know of another a fourth grade teacher who plays the clarinet and the oboe, and I was doing some staff training at this school and encouraged him, why not have your clarinet just out all the time like this other student had his guitar, and randomly at various times be playing your clarinet. What that does is model and instruct and inspire, adds beauty and variety to the day. But how many of you have put away the clarinet and the guitar, have stopped playing piano, have stopped painting, have stopped other kinds of arts and things that you were involved in? And at this moment, I am going to grab some notes. Excuse me for a second, because there's a few things that I wrote down that I wanted to make sure that I covered as I end here. Because I'm moving to really this last point that I want to make, which is how to cultivate wonder in ourselves. We have to model it. We have to continue to be growing ourselves, or we fall into a kind of hypocrisy. Here are a few things that I recommend. And let's see if I can just move this page up here for a moment. Here we go. I think there are a couple of things that are important. One is get alone in nature. Get outside. Get alone outside. Spend some significant time outside. Of course, take walks with your family or your spouse. But this world is made by God, and it's made for us to, it cultivates wonder naturally just being in the midst of it. But often we don't give ourselves enough time in it and with it. So get outside. Talk and walk. Lewis and Tolkien and others in the Inklings group in England in the 1930s or so did a lot of walking and talking. Great things happen when you do that. Get alone with the best books. The great books. They become great teachers and will cultivate your soul with the truth, goodness, and beauty that they contain. And these should be books that are outside of the curriculum that you're giving your students. If you're a homeschooling parent or a teacher, it's wonderful when students can see you reading and talking about books that they're not reading. They begin to see, this is actually a way of life. It's not just a curriculum that the school has prescribed. That's pretty important. So we're really talking here about modeling as well, but it's something that we need for our own soul's sake. Return to your first loves. What are they? What are the things that you loved before you got so distracted and so busy? You need to return to those things. Your children need to see you starting the piano again, even if you still Even if you're playing like you did when you were 14 years old and last left it, come back to it. How about surround yourself with like-minded people? So surround yourself with friends who are also seeking this. Your conversation will only help. And then follow your children. In this case, the child can be the father of the man. Let your children teach you how to be children again, wide-eyed and awake and at awe in the world. I think that's pretty important. G.K. Chesterton has been called somebody who just remained a child all of his life. So I'm going to leave you with this. I think I can automatically, even as I've been giving this seminar, which I've given several times, of course, I start thinking of the ways that this can live in a classroom. We need to find ways of enabling our students to enter into joy and wonder at the world once again. Charlotte Mason says a school should be more like a home than an institution. So even thinking about the architectural elements of school come to mind, the rhythms of the day. Perhaps we've inherited unconsciously we've inherited some ways of building schools, doing schools, scheduling schooling that are in tension and in some ways in contradiction with this tradition that comes to us from the classical past. How would you build a school so that it would cultivate wonder? How might you change the rhythms of the day that it might cultivate wonder? How might you change the rhythms of the way you actually interact with your students? How might you change the decor of your room, the way you greet students, the way you dismiss them, the way you begin a lesson, the way you end a lesson, the kind of timing that you take in education, in teaching a lesson? Would you spend perhaps more time in contemplation, more time in observation? Would you assess differently? How do you even assess wonder? Can you do it on a multiple choice exam? The implications begin to bubble up, and I encourage you to think about what the implications of this principle would be. I can promise you that if you think deeply about this principle and study it, the practices will begin to emerge very naturally in your life and work. Well, Pieper said that it's one of the highest possibilities of human nature to engage in wonder, and I encourage you personally to do this and to do it with your children and your students. Thank you for spending the time with me once again. I hope this has been of some help to you. And perhaps I'll see you next time for seminar number 7, which I think might be dealing with Skole and contemplation. Thanks again.